Today, I'm going to explain a drama thriller film called The Crush, which is based on a true story. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. After getting a new job, 28-year-old writer Nick Elliott moves to a new city. Though he goes apartment hunting, he doesn't have any luck with finding the perfect place for him. As he drives, he almost hits 14-year-old Adrian Forrester, a pretty and precocious girl who is rollerblading on the street. Nick instantly hits the brake, and in response, Adrian nonchalantly looks at him before going back to her house. Nick talks to Adrian's mother, Liv, about the sign he saw out front and asks if the guest house is still available. Liv is more than happy to show him the guest house, saying she and her husband, Cliff, are gone most of the time, and they would feel better if there was someone around. Nick realizes that someone is playing the piano, and Liv tells him that it's her daughter, Adrian. Nick tells her he's already met her outside. While Nick settles in, Adrian observes from outside. Her friend Cheyenne shows up, and when she asks Adrian what's going on, Adrian tells her that her parents have rented the guest house to some guy. She then instructs Cheyenne to check him out, and after Cheyenne's brief conversation with Nick, she goes back outside to report to Adrian. Meanwhile, Nick peeks through the window and sees Adrian hiding. As Adrian continues to watch Nick, Cheyenne tells her that Nick is okay. Nick goes to work at Peak Magazine and learns that he's already late for their meeting. He sits in the meeting room, and Amy Maddock asks him if he's new there, to which he says yes. When their boss Michael enters the room, he chastises Nick for being late. As Nick starts apologizing, Michael tells him that he knows who he is. He even says that Nick's former superiors describe him as an excellent researcher with only fair writing skills. With that, he asks Nick to conduct research and write an article about Robert Levinsky, a man who has embezzled $2 billion. Michael also tells Amy to track Nick and take pictures if they find anything. Sometime later, Nick calls Levinsky's chauffeur and asks if he could answer some questions for him. That night, Adrian shows up at the guest house unannounced while Nick is working. Nick invites her inside, and when Adrian wants to know what he's working on, Nick asks her if she's heard of Robert Levinsky. Adrian replies that Levinsky is the arbitrage guy who stole a lot of money, and Nick continues to tell her what he's learned about him, saying Levinsky has a friend in Knollwood. Adrian takes a chair and sits beside him, and then she asks if he meant to say, lover. Though he's starting to feel uncomfortable with Adrian's closeness to him, Nick says yes, adding that Levinsky's lover has flown to Geneva 6 times the previous year. Eager to learn about this information, Adrian suspects that stolen money must be hidden in a Swiss account. Without Nick's permission, she takes his tobacco, and when he asks her if she's really just 14, Adrian replies that she's almost 15 before puffing a smoke. Taking his tobacco back, Nick asks Adrian if it's already past her bedtime, to which the young girl replies, yes. One day, as Nick is taking a shower, Adrian shows up at the guest house again. Adrian looks at a picture of Nick and his grandfather and asks him if she can have it, but Nick says she can't since it's the only one he has. Disappointed, she puts the photo back on the table before peeking inside the bathroom while Nick is dressing up. Once Nick is done, Adrian gives Nick a pair of sunglasses, and he thanks her for them. She tries convincing him to attend her parents' party that weekend, and Nick tells her he'll try before asking her to leave. On his way to Michael's office, Nick realizes that there's something wrong with his article about Levinsky. He asks Michael if he could go over his work one more time, but Michael tells him that the article is fine, assuring him that the editors haven't touched it. Together with the photographs that Amy took, Michael asks his assistant to take the article to the art department. Michael gives Nick a slew of compliments, calling his research excellent and his text clean. He even commends him for having some style. Confused, Nick just thanks his boss then leaves. Once home, Nick decides to attend Liv and Cliff's party. Liv greets Nick and introduces him to her husband, and then they engage in small talk. When the couple leaves Nick to talk to some of their friends, he hears someone playing the piano. After checking who it is, Nick finds Adrian playing beautifully. Her performance blows everyone away, and they all give her a round of applause once she's finished. Nick then follows Adrian as she goes outside, and when she faces him, she says that she knew he'd come. Nick comments about Adrian's age, saying if only she were 10 years older, but Adrian doesn't let him finish. Instead, she asks what he'd do then, but he doesn't answer. Adrian then asks him what his boss thinks of his work, and this is when Nick discovers that she rewrote his article. Surprised, he asks her when and how she got inside the guest house, and Adrian proudly responds that it wasn't difficult. Though Nick tries telling her that she can't do that, Adrian dismisses him, saying that it worked. She even points out his mistakes in the article, but Nick repeats that she can't do that, adding that it isn't right. Upset, Adrian retorts that she only wants Nick to like her, and when Nick tells her that he does, Adrian requests that he take her for a ride since there's a place she wants to show him. Nick is reluctant to do it, though, but with Adrian's begging, he finally agrees. Nick and Adrian go to a coastal lighthouse, where Adrian apologizes to him for rewriting his article. He admits to being aware that he isn't a great writer, but he still feels bad for being bested by a 14-year-old. In an attempt to gain his sympathy, Adrian points out that Nick doesn't know how hard it is for her to make friends. Her parents made her skip 2 grades in school, and the only reason she has her only friend Cheyenne is that their mothers went to the same college. Adrian laments over how everybody thinks she's some kind of a freak, but Nick comforts her, assuring her that they can be friends. After a cheeky exchange, Adrian seductively kisses Nick's hand, catching him off guard. Then, she asks him not to be afraid of her. Before Nick could reply, Adrian kisses him, but Nick pulls away and tells her they have to go. As Adrian goes to bed that night, she smiles, thinking of their kiss. After some time, Nick is having a barbecue with Amy and some other guests when Michael visits him. He says that Levinsky wants to speak with him, so he's setting up an exclusive meeting where Levinsky wants to make him part of the deal. Michael guesses that Levinsky saw something in Nick's article that impressed him, then he gives Nick a bottle of wine before leaving. Since Nick needs some sticks for the marshmallows, Amy heads to the orchard to look for some. There, she notices a wasp's nest on the tree, pushing her to move more carefully. When Adrian shows up, Amy gets startled. She tells Adrian about that bee's nest, but Adrian only corrects her, saying that they're wasps. The girl starts lecturing Amy about the difference between bees and wasps, and when she finishes, Amy tells her that they should leave. Looking at Amy coldly, Adrian instructs her to leave slowly. Amy goes back to the barbecue party with Adrian, where they see Nick talking to a beautiful girl. Adrian says the girl looks like a model before telling Amy not to worry since some guys really like girls with small chests. Offended, Amy leaves her and talks to Nick, asking what's wrong with Adrian. Nick says he thought they're getting along just fine, but Amy says Adrian is giving her the creeps. When Nick says Adrian is just a kid, Amy tells him that Adrian has a crush on him, but he brushes it off. He then checks his phone messages, and he plays one from Adrian with her saying that she's thinking of him and that she wants him to call her. After hearing Adrian's message, Amy knowingly reminds Nick that he needs to be the adult here and that he can't blur the line. While working, Nick receives a call from Adrian, asking him if he missed her. She then asks him what he's doing, then playfully informs him that she just got her period. While talking to Adrian, Nick asks her if she took his picture with his grandfather, but Adrian denies it, asking him why she would do that. Unsure if Adrian is telling the truth, Nick ends the call. He goes to Adrian's house to look for her, and when he doesn't see her, he starts wandering inside. Nick finds Adrian's room, but she's nowhere to be seen. He looks at her pictures, and on the bed Nick finds a heart-shaped pillow with both their initials embroidered on it. Suddenly, Nick hears the sound of running water, and when he looks out the door, he sees Adrian getting ready to take a shower. Left with no other choice, Nick hides inside her closet, and when Adrian comes in, she starts undressing. In the closet, Nick accidentally makes a sound, and as she realizes that Nick is hiding there, Adrian finishes taking off her clothes before finally facing his way. With her whole body exposed, Adrian slowly ties up her hair, and with a smirk, she finally goes to the bathroom. Nick then quietly leaves her room, but he runs into Cliff at the front door. When Cliff asks why he's there, Nick says he just returned a book to Adrian. Cliff asks Nick to help him carry his boxes to the attic, and once there, he sees a carousel that Cliff's been trying to restore. Cliff says they were supposed to turn the whole attic into a playroom for Adrian, but she never took to it. As Cliff continues talking about his daughter, a bathrobe-clad Adrian shows up, startling Nick. Cliff tells her that they're just talking about her, and Nick excuses himself. When Nick sees Adrian in the swing, he approaches her and asks if they can talk. With Adrian's attention on him, Nick tells Adrian that he likes her, and Adrian responds in kind by saying she likes him too. However, Nick clarifies that he only likes her as a friend, then reminds her of their 14-year age difference. Despite his efforts to make their boundaries clear, Adrian ignores him, forcing Nick to stop her from swinging so he can promise her that he will always be her friend. As Nick turns to leave, Adrian innocently brings up the night they kissed, stopping Nick in his tracks. He insists that it was a mistake, but when Adrian questions if sneaking into her closet to watch her undress was a mistake too, Nick couldn't even bring himself to answer her. Again, Nick turns his back on her, but Adrian asks if he's ever slept with a girl with no experience before teasing him about knowing that he wants to. Furious, Nick desperately tells her that she's too young for him and nothing's going on between them while an unbothered Adrian only snickers and continues swinging. One day, Nick shows Amy his newly restored car, but he is surprised to see that it's been vandalized. At the Forrester's residence, Nick tells Adrian's parents about his suspicion that their daughter defaced his car. Unfortunately, they don't believe him, especially since he didn't actually see Adrian do it. In the middle of their conversation, Adrian enters the room, and when her father straight up asks her if she scratched up Nick's car, she innocently denies it and leaves. Outside, Cheyenne tells Nick that she needs to talk to him about Adrian, then asks him to meet her in the back of the orchard later. Unknown to them, Adrian is watching from her window. At the stables, Adrian tells her friend to dress up while she takes care of her horse. Cheyenne then thanks her, and as soon as she's gone, Adrian loosens Cheyenne's saddle on her horse. During their practice, Cheyenne falls off her horse, injuring herself from show jumping. As everyone gathers around Cheyenne to help her, Adrian coldly asks Cheyenne if she's okay before she's taken away. That night, Nick waits for Cheyenne at the orchard, but she doesn't show up. When Nick decides it's finally time to leave, he is startled to see Adrian standing there. Adrian confronts Nick about her friend, asking if he likes Cheyenne, but Nick ignores her question. Adrian then informs Nick that Cheyenne is at the hospital due to a riding accident. When he asks if Cheyenne is okay, Adrian replies that she will be. When Adrian starts walking away, she tells Nick that it just goes to show that one can never be too careful. One time, Nick comes home with Amy. As Nick stays in the car to get the groceries, Adrian asks Amy if she's ever been out to the lighthouse, which is known for being a makeout place. Adrian makes a sly remark about Nick taking her there before, then mocks Amy about how he might take her there sometime, too. Irritated, Amy goes inside the guest house, and when Adrian greets Nick as he walks up the stairs, he just ignores her. At work, Nick is telling his colleagues about his meeting with Levinsky when Samantha calls him to inform him that his file is blank. Nick supposes that he brought the wrong file, so he heads back home to check. At home, he finds that the files on his disk are all gone. He calls Amy to tell her that Adrian messed everything up, then asks her to cover for him at work. When she agrees, Nick promises that he'll be out of there for good as soon as he finishes rewriting his article. After ending the call, Nick notices a floppy disk that is half hidden under the carpet. He picks up the disk and lifts the carpet, where he finds a secret trapdoor. Nick opens it and goes inside, and there, he finds a shrine filled with lit up candles, love letters from Adrian, and one photo of him. This only pisses him off, so Nick nails the trapdoor shut. Over the next few days, Adrian continuously calls Nick, but Nick keeps ignoring her. He painstakingly works on his article while his answering machine receives messages from Adrian nonstop. Nick also makes sure to have his locks at home replaced, and at work, Nick finally submits his rewritten article. After that, Nick starts looking for another place to stay, informing the landlady that he wants to move in that week. When he gets home, Nick starts packing up his stuff, then Amy shows up to tell him that she's glad he's moving. They then start talking about work and dating, and before they know it, they're already kissing. In her room, Adrian cries as Nick still won't return her calls. That night, Adrian sneaks inside the guest house again and stands at the foot of the bed as she watches Nick and Amy sleep. Feeling like something's wrong, Nick suddenly wakes up and bolts upright, looking around the house. He then goes out to see if there's anyone there, but he only sees Adrian from their window, savagely chopping lemons. Shocked, Nick asks her what she's doing, and Adrian tells him she's making lemonade before asking if he wants some. Amy runs into Adrian the following day as she leaves Nick's place. She's about to get in her car when Adrian indirectly asks her if she slept with Nick. Fed up with Adrian's attitude, Amy tells her that one day, when she's all grown up with a real relationship, she'll realize that her feelings for Nick were just a crush. In retaliation, Adrian retorts that she wishes to be as smart as Amy when she grows up. To avoid an argument, Amy just tells Adrian to go play before driving away. One day, while Amy is working in her darkroom, Adrian locks her in and releases wasps into the vents. There, she sees that one of the photos is of Adrian's, which confuses her. But when the wasps swarm inside, Amy quickly starts panicking, and she ends up breaking a window before passing out. Nick learns about Amy's accident from Michael, and as they talk, Adrian enters the guest house without his permission, trying to interrupt Nick to tell him about her competition. Once Nick is done talking to Michael, Adrian innocently asks him what happened. After Nick lets her know, she sympathizes with him and holds his hand, but Nick pulls his hand away and gets suspicious. At Adrian's horse riding competition, Adrian gets deeply disappointed when Nick doesn't show up. She then takes a cab and goes to Michael's event, where she slaps Nick and causes a scene. Humiliated, Nick drags her away from the guests and pushes her against a wall, warning her to stay away from him. Ignoring him, Adrian kisses him and professes her love for him, but Nick just rejects her advances. Adrian gets mad and starts throwing a fit, repeatedly hitting Nick while screaming. Everyone is now looking at them, and as Adrian tries to kiss Nick again, he pushes her away and calls her pathetic. Nick goes straight to the apartment he was supposed to move into, but the landlady says Adrian told her that he is a drug dealer. Nick is then forced to go home, where he is arrested for assaulting Adrian. While the cops take him away, Nick sees Adrian with her parents, with the girl looking frail while crying. Cliff then tries hitting Nick, but the cops manage to keep him away. When Nick gets a better view of Adrian, he sees that she is covered with bruises. At the hospital, Adrian starts making up a story about how Nick assaulted her, and they all believe her. Meanwhile, at the police station, Nick recounts how Adrian used to stalk him, then asserts that they should lock her up. The detectives don't believe him, and they then tell Nick that they found a seed inside of her. With that, they take him to jail. Later, Michael bails him out, and Nick learns that the seed found inside of Adrian matches his blood type and that he's not allowed to go near their house. Nick still maintains his innocence, insisting that Adrian must have stolen a used contraceptive from his trash, but Michael doesn't believe him. As Nick gathers his things that night, Cheyenne visits him and tells him about a guy named Rick, who Adrian had a crush on. Cheyenne says he was their camp counselor who died from poisoning. Finally, she reveals that Adrian is knowledgeable about such things, including wasps. She then informs Nick about Adrian's diary in her bedroom, which might help clear his name, and Nick says he'll tell his lawyers about it. As Cheyenne leaves, she secretly goes into Adrian's house, thinking it must be empty. While Nick continues his packing, he hears a sound coming from Adrian's house, and when he checks it out, he realizes that the sound is from upstairs. In Adrian's room, Nick sees her bed filled with lit-up candles, an apology letter, and his photo with his grandfather, which has been defaced. Adrian then shows up at the doorway, holding a wooden tool while crying. When Nick asks where Cheyenne is, Adrian only gets more upset, saying she came back to the house for him. Nick ignores Adrian and continues looking for Cheyenne, and as he walks in the hallway, Adrian starts hitting him with a wooden tool. Nick tries fighting back, but Adrian manages to push him over the wooden railings. Adrian goes down to check on Nick, saying it's so sad to end that way. But before she could hit him again, Cliff suddenly arrives. Adrian quickly runs upstairs while Cliff tries opening the door, and as Nick manages to get up and go to the attic, he finds Cheyenne gagged and bound on the carousel. Meanwhile, Cliff manages to break into the house, and while Nick tries to help Cheyenne, Adrian starts attacking him again. Nick attempts to subdue Adrian, and when Cliff arrives, he tackles Nick, forcing Adrian to knock her father unconscious. Nick goes back to helping Cheyenne, and when Adrian tries attacking him again, Nick finally stops her by punching her in the face. Later on, Adrian gets confined in a psychiatric hospital, where she continues writing letters for Nick. Adrian's doctor checks on her and tells her that she's making great progress before reminding her to attend their afternoon session. Meanwhile, Amy brings Nick the letters from Adrian, and he is surprised to see how many there are. Back at the psychiatric hospital, Adrian's just finished having a session with her doctor. She goes back to her room and takes out a photo of him and his wife, then glares at it.